Here's the thing about the Oscars. Every February, Hollywood throws itself the most expensive party in the world, hands out gold statues to movies most people never actually paid to see, and then acts surprised when the numbers don't add up. This year was different though. 2026 gave us something genuinely rare. A Best Picture race where a couple of the nominees actually made real money, and a couple others lost so much that the studios involved are probably still staring at spreadsheets wondering what went wrong. Hi, my name is Bernard, and this is Frame Theory. The nominees nobody paid to see The Brutalist. Brady Corbett's 3.5-hour Hungarian immigrant epic. Shot on VistaVision, premiered at Venice, swept through the festival circuit like a freight train, and landed 7 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, and a win for Adrien Brody for Best Actor. Critically, the thing is basically untouchable. A 2026 consensus pick for one of the best films of the decade. The budget was around $10 million, not crazy for a passion project of this scale. But the worldwide gross, just under $11 million. So technically it made its money back. Technically. Once you factor in marketing and distribution costs, Focus Features was not popping champagne. This is a film that needed awards heat just to stay in theaters past week 2, and it got that heat. But even a Best Actor win couldn't drag general audiences into a 3.5-hour art film on a Tuesday night. Then there's Conclave, Edward Berger's Vatican thriller about cardinals electing a new pope. Sounds like the kind of movie your uncle describes as very good without being able to tell you a single thing that happens in it. Budget around $40 million. Worldwide gross ended up around $64 million. So that one at least covered itself. Respectable. Not a hit, but respectable. The kind of number that makes a studio exhale rather than celebrate. And then, A Complete Unknown. James Mangold's Bob Dylan origin story, with Timothée Chalamet doing his absolute best to convince you he is in fact a young Robert Zimmerman from Minnesota. Budget was $140 million. That is a lot of money to spend on a biopic about a folk singer, even one of the most famous folk singers who ever lived. It made around $68 million domestically and ended somewhere around $145 million worldwide. So it basically broke even at best. Lost money at worst, depending on how you account for marketing. Chalamet got a Best Actor nomination, and the film got a Best Picture nod, but it never found that mainstream crossover moment everyone was counting on. James Mangold made Logan and Ford versus Ferrari. He knows how to make a movie people actually want to watch. This one just never clicked the way the studio needed it to. The ones that actually made money. Alright, now for the good stuff. Wicked. John Chu's adaptation of the Broadway musical that has been in development so long that some of the people who were teenagers when the show opened on Broadway in 2003 are now dropping their own teenagers off at screenings of this movie. The budget was $145 million. The worldwide gross was $720 million. $720 million. That is not a prestige film quietly earning its budget back. That is a genuine blockbuster wearing a Best Picture nomination like a little bow tie. Cynthia Erivo got a Best Actress nomination. Ariana Grande got Best Supporting Actress. The film itself was nominated for Best Picture, and it made more money than almost everything else on this list combined. John Chu had been trying to get this thing made for years, and when it finally landed, it landed hard. This is what happens when a prestige project also happens to be something people genuinely want to see on the biggest screen possible. Then there's Dune Part 2, Denis Villeneuve. Budget of $190 million. Worldwide gross of $711 million. Another genuine blockbuster. Another Best Picture nomination. Villeneuve has now done something almost nobody in Hollywood can do. He made a 2-part science fiction epic based on the most notoriously unfilmable novel in genre history. And both parts were massive hits. The first Dune made $400 million. The second nearly doubled it. The Academy gave it a Best Picture nomination, which honestly felt like the industry finally catching up to something audiences figured out 2 years earlier. And then there's Emilia Pérez, Jacques Audiard's Spanish-language musical crime film about a cartel boss who transitions and fakes her own death. I know, it sounds like someone lost a bet and made a movie about it. But this thing won 4 Oscars, including Best Supporting Actress for Zoe Saldana, and it became the most nominated non-English language film in Oscar history. Budget was around $21 million. Netflix picked it up and gave it a limited theatrical release. The actual box office was modest, around $5 million in theaters. But Netflix doesn't exactly hand out their streaming numbers, so the real story of what this film made is probably a lot more interesting than what the box office reflects. What's wild is that it divided critics and audiences almost right down the middle. Some people thought it was a masterpiece. Others thought it was a mess. It got nominated for 13 Oscars. That's almost a record. And it took home 4. Love it or hate it, you cannot ignore it. The animated wild card, The Wild Robot. DreamWorks Animation. Directed by Chris Sanders, the same guy who made Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon. 2 films that, by the way, people still put on when they need a good cry and don't want to admit it. Budget of $78 million. Worldwide gross of $323 million. Best Animated Feature win. Best Picture nomination. And somehow, still, the film that most people in the awards conversation treated like a polite afterthought. Here's what's strange about that. DreamWorks has always existed in Pixar's shadow, and I'm not sure that's entirely fair. Pixar gets the think pieces, Pixar gets the discourse, Pixar gets the adults in the theater crying into their popcorn while pretending they brought a kid as cover. DreamWorks makes a film that earns 4 times its budget, gets a Best Picture nomination, and people still talk about it like it snuck into the party through a side door. Nobody was saying The Wild Robot was going to do this. It opened quietly. No massive marketing blitz, no cultural moment, no viral trailer that made everyone lose their minds in September. It just showed up, and then something interesting happened. Parents took their kids, then went back with their partners. Then a cousin heard about it, then a coworker mentioned it. That is word of mouth working exactly the way it is supposed to, which is increasingly rare in a market where a film either explodes opening weekend or disappears entirely by Tuesday. The Best Picture nomination matters here too. Animated films almost never get there. You have to go back to Beauty and the Beast in 1991 to find the last time it felt like a real statement rather than a token gesture. The Wild Robot earning that slot wasn't the Academy being charitable. It was the Academy acknowledging that the best film about grief, adaptation, and unconditional love that year happened to be animated. And then there's the math, which is really the whole point of this channel when you strip everything else away. $78 million budget, $323 million back. That is a 4.1 times return in a year when studios were routinely spending $250 million on live-action tentpoles and walking away with less. No franchise, no legacy IP beyond the source novel, no guaranteed audience. Just a robot, a goose, and a story that apparently a lot of people needed to see. In any other year, that's the headline. In 2026, it was practically a footnote, which tells you something about just how strange this awards season actually was. The prestige picks that barely moved the needle. Now we're back in familiar Oscar territory. Films that critics loved, awards bodies adored, and general audiences largely ignored. Nickel Boys. Ramel Ross's adaptation of Colson Whitehead's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel about a black reform school in 1960s Florida, shot entirely from first-person perspective, which is either a radical formal achievement or the thing that kept most people from buying a ticket, depending on who you ask. Budget was around $20 million. Box office was somewhere just over $2 million. Amazon MGM put it out and clearly decided theatrical was more of a formality than a strategy. It got a Best Picture nomination. It deserved it. But this is exactly the kind of film the Oscars exist to amplify, because the market sure wasn't going to do it on its own. September 5th. Tim Kruger's thriller about the 1972 Munich Olympics massacre, told from the perspective of the ABC Sports broadcast team. Tight, tense, genuinely gripping, and seen by almost nobody outside of film festival circuits and award screeners. Budget estimated around $20 million. Worldwide, theatrical gross, just under $4 million. Best Original Screenplay nomination. In any other year, this would have been a genuine dark horse. In 2026, it was just another great film that got lost in the shuffle. I'm Still Here, Walter Salazar's Brazilian film about the real-life disappearance of activist Rubens Paiva under the military dictatorship in 1971. Fernanda Torres won Best Actress at Cannes. The film won the Golden Bear at Berlin. It became the first Brazilian film nominated for Best Picture, and it won Best International Feature Film. Budget around $8 million. Worldwide gross around $12 million. A genuine triumph on the awards circuit. A genuine ghost at the multiplex. But look, nobody expected I'm Still Here to open against Wicked. It was never going to. What it did was carry the weight of Brazilian cinema on its back and stick the landing. The acting nominees, stars who couldn't open a movie. This is where it gets interesting, because the acting categories this year were stacked with genuinely great performances attached to films that range from modest hits to quiet disasters. Adrien Brody, winning Best Actor for The Brutalist, was not exactly a surprise by the time the envelope opened. The man gave a 3.5-hour performance that barely let you breathe. The film made $11 million. His first Oscar win was for The Pianist in 2003, another film about European Jewish experience, another film that hit harder with critics than with general audiences. The pattern is almost poetic at this point. Demi Moore won Best Actress for The Substance. Now, here is a number that should make you sit up. The Substance was made for $17 million and grossed over $70 million worldwide. That is a horror film directed by Coralie Farges that went to Cannes, won Best Screenplay, and then made 4 times its budget in theaters. Moore hadn't been in awards conversation for years. And then she made a body horror film about the entertainment industry eating women alive. And suddenly she's standing on the Dolby Theater stage with a statuette. The Substance is the rare case where a genuinely weird, genuinely uncomfortable film found a real theatrical audience. That almost never happens. Kieran Culkin won Best Supporting Actor for A Real Pain. Jesse Eisenberg wrote and directed. Budget around $5 million. Worldwide gross around $5 million. Basically a wash. But the performances in that film, both Eisenberg and Culkin, were the kind of thing that gets talked about for a long time. Small budget, small gross, enormous emotional footprint. Zoe Saldana for Emilia Perez, already covered. But worth noting again that she is now one of a handful of actors who has appeared in the 3 highest grossing films of all time, Avatar, Avengers Infinity War, and Avengers Endgame, and also won an Oscar for a $21 million Spanish-language Netflix musical. That career arc is genuinely one of a kind. The documentary and international wildcards. No Other Land won Best Documentary Feature. And if you only followed the Oscars casually this year, there's a decent chance you heard more about the acceptance speech than you did about the film itself. That's not an accident. A Palestinian and Israeli collective spent 4 years filming the systematic demolition of a West Bank community called Masefer Yatta. No major studio, no distribution deal waiting at the finish line. Just a group of filmmakers pointing cameras at something the rest of the world was largely looking away from. American distributors stayed away for months. The subject matter was too charged, too politically uncomfortable, too likely to generate the kind of controversy that makes a studio's marketing department break out in hives. So, the film won a BAFTA, then it won an Oscar. And it did both of those things before most American audiences even had a legitimate way to watch it in a theater. Think about that for a second. A film won the highest documentary honor in the industry, while the industry itself was still deciding whether it wanted anything to do with it. When it finally got picked up and released, the US box office came in somewhere around $1 million. The budget was minimal, the kind of number that wouldn't cover catering on a mid-range Netflix production. The impact was something else entirely. The filmmakers got to the podium and said things that made headlines the next morning in publications that hadn't mentioned the film once during its entire festival run. That's a specific kind of power that no marketing budget can manufacture. This is what the documentary category is actually for. Not true crime content dressed up in prestige packaging. Not a famous person's redemption arc with a streaming deal already attached. Films that exist because someone decided the thing needed to be documented, consequences be damned. Then there's The Seed of the Sacred Fig. Iranian director Mohammad Rasulov filmed it in secret inside Iran, fled the country before production was even finished, and submitted it through Germany for the international feature category while living in exile. Budget around $2 million, worldwide gross around $3 million, a margin so thin it barely registers as profit. There are films on this list that lost north of $100 million. Decisions made in boardrooms, talent deals signed over lunch, marketing campaigns that cost more than this entire film. And then there is a movie made in secret by a director who faced genuine imprisonment for making it, and it scrapes past its budget by $1 million if it's lucky. The market is a deeply imperfect instrument. Sometimes the numbers are the least interesting thing about a film. Sometimes they're the most damning thing you can say about the industry surrounding it. What the numbers actually tell us. So here's the thing. When you lay all of this out, the 2026 Oscars tell a story about two completely different Hollywoods existing at the same time. On one side, you have Wicked and Dune Part 2, combined worldwide gross of nearly $1.4 billion. Best Picture nominees. Studio blockbusters that also happen to be genuinely good films that genuinely connected with audiences. That almost never happens. Usually the prestige lane and the commercial lane run parallel and never cross. This year, they crossed twice. On the other side, you have films like Nickel Boys, September 5th, and The Brutalist, making a combined $40 million on budgets that totaled $50 million. Films that exist almost entirely outside the marketplace. Films that need the Oscars not just for validation, but for survival. Without that Best Picture nomination, The Brutalist is already gone from theaters by the time you're reading about it. With it, it gets another 8 weeks in a Blu-ray release that actually sells. And then there's the middle. Conclave making $64 million. A complete unknown basically breaking even. The Wild Robot making 4 times its budget without anyone making a big deal about it. The substance-turning body horror into an actual box office story. The Oscars have spent years being accused of only celebrating films nobody watches, and that criticism has been fair more than once. But 2026 showed something slightly different. When a film like Wicked is genuinely one of the best reviewed musicals in years and also makes $700 million, the argument that prestige and commerce are permanently incompatible starts to look a little thin. What it really comes down to is this. A Best Picture nomination is worth somewhere between $5 and $15 million in additional box office depending on the film. For a movie that cost $140 million, that's not going to save you. For a movie that cost $8 million, that's the difference between breaking even and building a career. The Oscars are not a box office mechanism. They never were. But every year the numbers tell you exactly which films Hollywood made because they had to, which ones they made because someone genuinely believed in them, and which ones somehow managed to be both at the same time. 2026 had more of that last category than usual, and that, honestly, is worth something. So that's every 2026 Oscar Best Picture nominee, what it cost, what it made, and what the gap between those two numbers actually means. The story this year isn't really about flops or hits. It's about a ceremony that somehow managed to celebrate a $700 million musical and a film made in secret by a director in exile in the same breath. That's a weird and genuinely interesting thing. If you want more of this, subscribe to Frame Theory. We do this every week: box office, budgets, the real financial stories behind the films everyone is talking about. Hit the notification bell if you want to know the moment a new video drops. I'm Bernard. Thanks for watching.